Thank you very much, Paul, for that introduction. I want to start today by extending my personal condolences and those of the entire Labour Party to Ruth Perry's family, in particular to her sister Julia, with whom I spoke last night, and to her friends and colleagues at this most difficult time. I imagine I speak for all of you when I say that Julia's speech this morning was deeply moving. I can scarcely begin to imagine the depth of her family's grief, the scale of their loss. Ruth was, by so many accounts, a passionate and hard-working head teacher, epitomising the dedication that you all show each and every day to give our children and young people the best start in life. The weeks that have followed the public news of her death have seen an unprecedented light shone on the pressures school leaders, teachers and staff are facing. You and your colleagues have made your voices heard, loud and clear, and Labour is listening. We want to work with you to make our schools brilliant places to work and fantastic places for children to learn. Because the well-being of school staff must be a concern for everyone right across society. For all of you, for yourselves, for your colleagues, your peers and friends, for parents and also for children, for those who inspect schools, and of course for politicians, for ministers and for government. Because a country that doesn't take seriously the well-being of teachers and leaders, if we don't take that seriously, then we don't take our children's education seriously and we don't take our future seriously. And Labour is all too well aware what recent years have meant for teachers, for heads and for school staff. The government might act as if the pandemic never happened. They certainly have an approach to children's recovery which reflects that. But it did. You saw what it meant. You rose to the challenges it brought. And today in schools, as leaders and teachers always tell me, the lasting impact is being felt on learning, on behaviour, on attendance. The government failed to engage with these challenges during the pandemic. It failed to engage with them after the pandemic. It is still failing today. And that failure, sadly, wasn't unexpected. It didn't come out of the blue. You all know how for year after year, more and more has been asked of heads and of teachers, and less has been there for them. More problems in our schools because you know, as I do, that the consequences of child poverty don't end when children enter the classroom. An epidemic of mental ill health in our classrooms, stretching staff as well as children. A once proud network of careers guidance services left to fray and wither. Again and again, expectations on teachers and leaders to step up as other services are stripped away. That is why Labour's policies, Labour's calls for changes in our schools are calls that are funded, costed and planned. Changes that will deliver for every child. More teachers to fill the thousands of vacancies in our schools. Mental health counsellors in schools supporting our young people not merely to achieve but to thrive. Professional careers guidance in every school for all of our young people, supporting not just some of them but all of them to succeed. Funded by ending the tax breaks that private schools enjoy, to deliver high standards for all of our children, because I believe excellence is for everyone. Now, Labour will never shy away from asking people to give their best, but expectations have to be matched with resources, power with responsibility. It is laughable that the government seeks to teach more maths, but without more maths teachers. Education is not just any government responsibility, more than any other. It shapes not just the society we are, the economy we have, but the future we build together. And after 13 years, the poverty of ambition from this government is making that future not just narrower, but poorer. Poorer for our country, poorer for our children, poorer in economic terms, but also poorer in cultural and social terms. That poverty of ambition, poverty of outcome is evident in everything this government does. And just a fortnight after I spoke to you here last year, the government introduced a schools bill. I said then, and I will say again now, that there was much in that bill that Labour supports. It is right that we have a register and visibility of homeschooling. that a national funding formula for schools be transparent and set out in law, that independent educational institutions come under proper oversight. Those laws are needed. And if the government does not find time to legislate on these issues, then be in no doubt the next Labour government will. But I don't need to tell you that the bill also represented a massive missed opportunity. So many of the key challenges today around recruitment, around retention, around staffing, simply unaddressed. And that is not for want of advocacy, not for want of trying. And I want to pay particular tribute to Paul Whiteman, who has been a powerful and a consistent voice for all of you, for all leaders, teachers and school staff more widely, right through the pandemic, right throughout current disputes. Paul has been an effective and compelling voice at a time when heads and teachers face even greater challenges. And today I am clearer than ever that the way inspection works is one of those major challenges. Last year I said to you that it was time Ofsted turned a corner. I said that to believe in accountability is not to believe that it cannot be better, more effective. That the Ofsted we will need tomorrow is very different from the Ofsted we needed 30 years ago. And the need for change is clearer than ever today. Labour has been and always will be the party of high and rising school standards. That means inspections, it means accountability. I've yet to meet a head teacher who disagreed with that basic principle. But sometimes I think ministers and others forget the reasons why inspection is there in the first place. Inspection is there, schools are there, teachers are there, all for the same ultimate purpose. We all want high standards for the very same reason. High standards and the demand for them is because that is what we owe to our children, and they must never be forgotten. And I know from speaking to so many of you as I have travelled the country, that is outcomes for our children, that is what drives you. That high and rising standards, school improvement, they are all important, but they are a means to an end. Opportunity for every child in every corner of our country, and our school system today doesn't have that focus, doesn't have that purpose. Too many school leaders tell me that they've stepped back from getting involved in inspection. Too many assistant heads, deputy heads tell me that they don't want to move up to headship. And too often I hear complaints about inspections of primary schools by secondary school leaders. Often heads say they expect to be challenged, they expect to be stretched, but they want it to be informed, to be constructive, to be collaborative. And all too often it is not. As a country, we have to do better than this. You deserve better, teachers deserve better, parents deserve better. And I make no apology for this. What matters most is that our children deserve better. So Labour will end the headline grades and will introduce new school report cards. We will give parents a clearer picture of the breadth of what goes on in our schools. Parents should know whether the school is focused on doing better for the children it serves, what the school is best at, where there is most room for improvement, where that improvement is happening and the direction of travel to. One or two word judgments are not giving you the recognition that you deserve for the work that you do. They do not give parents the information they deserve on their child's school. They are simplistic, they hide a variation in the quality of schools and the pace of their improvement. And they form part of a wider system that fails when schools most need it to drive the change our children need. Parents, schools, and above all, our children deserve better than a system that is high stakes for staff, yet low information for parents. And I am clear that Labour will never stand by when children are not getting the education they deserve. So trigger points for intervention will always be needed. But the system of accountability in our schools should enable improvement and drive change. It should be a source of strength, not one of fear. And we will consult you, working with parents to get this right. Because I am determined that parents must be partners in the push for better. I want every school leader, every teacher, not just to be achieving for our children, but to be supported in that process of ongoing improvement. And that push for better includes better inspection. In just 2 days, inspectors are being asked to look at everything, at safeguarding, at sports lessons, at teacher development, at trigonometry, at attendance and at attainment. One look at safeguarding issues in 5 or 10 years, and it matters more than that, we can all agree. When schools are getting it right, they need to know. And when things could be better, they need to be improved. And what matters most is getting it right for our children. Now, it wouldn't be right of me to talk about Ofsted today without recognising that they have announced some changes in recent weeks. But like many of you, I am concerned that they do not address the scale of the improvement that we need to see. And the reason for that is simple. The levers for change don't rest with Ofsted. They rest with the government, and they rest with ministers. It is the Conservative government that has built an inspection system that is at once dreaded by staff, but failing our children. So while I acknowledge the changes that have been announced, I tell you they are not enough, and Labour will go further. We will deliver the scale of the change that leaders and teachers, parents, and most importantly, our children need. Labour will create a new annual review of safeguarding, of health and safety, of attendance and off-rolling. These are ongoing issues that affect every school. They are not issues that can be left year after year. It is not fair on children, and it is not fair on all of you. The system that we have is high stakes, low information. That has to change. Again, we will work with you. We will consult with you to get this right. Labour is clear, and I am clear, that listening is a strength, not a weakness. I am determined that under Labour, the focus will again return to how we deliver a better future for every child, through high and rising standards in every school. Of course that, but wider than that too. Through a commitment right across government to build a future where families come first, building the best country in the world in which to grow up. Above all, under Labour, excellence will be for everyone. High standards for our children means high standards for teachers and leaders, and that is what I am determined to deliver, working with school leaders, with teachers and with all of our school staff, by investing in heads and investing in teachers, because we know well that investing in our children means investing in you. My focus is clear. When our school system isn't working, it isn't politicians who have failed, it is our children. And it is the children who need those high standards in our schools most. It is children without someone to read to them, children who lack a quiet place to do their homework, children with sometimes unstable homes or unstable housing. It is those children who need good schools and good teachers most, who are let down when the government supports neither. Today's children are tomorrow's society, and it goes to the heart of my politics that tomorrow can and must be better than today. It is why a key part of my approach as Shadow Secretary of State has been on building a coalition for change in childcare, a coalition that goes beyond early years education, that extends beyond the parents of our smallest children. For just as parents know that childcare costs don't end when their children begin at primary school, so schools know that too many children start school behind their peers. That attainment gap opens up early, needs tackling early, and crucially, the role of schools in tackling inequality, in closing that gap, is not a role that you all perform alone. That is why last autumn, at Labour's conference, I announced that we will introduce breakfast clubs in every primary school in England, a funded service, not at extra cost, available to every child from every family in every primary school. Breakfast clubs drive up standards and achievement. They improve behaviour and attendance because, as you will all know, it's about the club as well as the breakfast. They enable parents to work. They give mums and dads choices. They fit into our broader vision of schools as central to partnerships with children with their futures at their heart. In a system there to deliver the best outcomes, not for politicians like me, but for them. Because I know the difference it makes. To me, education is more than political. It is deeply personal to me. My own family, my own life, has been a lesson in the power of education. My local state schools in the North East changed my life. My mum brought me up on her own. The 1980s weren't always a great time to be a single parent. We didn't always have it easy, but in many other ways I knew that I was lucky. Because while we didn't always have much money, I had a family, not least my granddad, who supported me to read, where education was valued and encouraged. And my luck also meant that I went to a school where my teachers had huge ambitions for me and my friends, because they saw and believed in the value and worth of each and every one of us. And I look back now and I know how fortunate I've been. Not every child at every school had those chances. They didn't then, and they certainly don't now. Our teachers knew what we could achieve. They were determined that our ambition should be matched by our achievements, and I will never forget them. So when Keir asked me to become Shadow Secretary of State for Education, I was honoured and delighted. I was lucky, but life should not come down to luck. Too many children today are held back by virtue of where they're born, their circumstances and family background. I want every child in every school, in every corner of our country to benefit from a brilliant education that instills in them a love of learning that they carry throughout their lives. And my mission is simple. I want that for everyone. So if Labour comes to power, if we win that next election, I ask you to remember, to think back to a time when you saw a Conservative government that treated our children as an afterthought, when you saw your class sizes increasing, when you had to reach into your pocket, as I know that too many of you too often feel you have to do, for pens, pencils, books, sometimes even food for the children that you teach. When you had a child at the back of the class on free school meals, not sure if she fitted in, with no winter coat for the playground, nervous and anxious about her future. I want you to remember that that child grew up to be the Secretary of State in the Labour government, and the success of every child in every classroom is the measure by which you and I and the government that Keir Starmer will lead will all be judged, the yardstick of Labour's success in our schools. Great schools and great teachers transform my life. I know that you can transform every life. It will be my mission to ensure that you do. Thank you very much.
Colleagues, so I'm just going to ask Paul has got some questions which were submitted from you, and some of those have been selected, and Paul is going to ask Bridget.
Bridget, we know you're campaigning this afternoon, but nonetheless you've been generous enough to stay and take some questions. Conference, I hope you'll forgive us for just brigading them into, there's 5, and then I've got one that I'm going to just indulge myself and ask you at the end. And these have come, they're themes really, and we've built them into a question. But the first one that Conference is really interested in, and I know actually we haven't had a lot of debate about this at Conference yet this year, but it's school structures and what Labour policy will be in terms of the direction of travel with academies, or will there still be the ability for schools to federate under a local authority system as well?
Thank you. I mean, as I just said last time when I was here a year ago, we were just about to see the schools bill, which has now fallen by the wayside. So it is at times difficult to give you clear commitments around some of this, given the uncertainty around what we're seeing and the fact that events will often move so fast. I'm clear that what matters most to me are the standards that we deliver in our schools rather than those structures. And we might talk more about this, but my big concern is around how we recruit and retain brilliant people into our schools. I think that has to be the real focus of activity from government right now. And I think given that the situation will likely deteriorate even further ahead of the next election, that will be a real focus of my work if I'm Secretary of State.
I'm just going to push you just a touch more on that, because I think that's helpful in terms of having structures that recruit and retain the very best. But one of the things that members tell me about the decision to move into academies is the loss of agency as head teachers and the loss of identity if they do so. Would Labour engage with us to discuss how you would deal with that, as well as just kind of taking the foot off the gas, I guess, a little bit in terms of an all-out assault on the structures that exist right now?
I think the passage of the schools bill has been a cautionary tale in what can go wrong if you fail to listen, fail to consult and fail to work with people properly and seriously. During the passage of that bill, during the time that we had its short life in Parliament, we tabled lots of amendments in the House of Lords that addressed some of those concerns. So making sure that we seek to smooth the differences between schools. So all schools, for example, following the national curriculum, in smoothing out some of that and in making sure we have greater consistency across the board, particularly, for example, looking to the role of local authorities around place planning and around the role for local authorities in coordinating admissions. So there are lots of areas where I think we could make change from government, but without some of the destabilising impacts that I think would come of major structural upheaval.
Thanks very much. And I have no doubt that once we know the election timetable, we'll be giving you much more of our view and advice on that going forward as well. So, look, just moving on because of time, I want to move on to SEND and the general consensus that the current SEND system is absolutely in crisis, including a real lack of access to specialist advisors. So what would Labour do to begin to address the crisis and the lack of advisors, specialist services?
I think the first point is to recognise, and I agree and accept, that we have reached crisis point in the SEND system. I speak to parents all the time who tell me that they feel the very legalistic, adversarial approach that we've got to is not giving children what they need. And I know that for many school leaders and for teachers, it's not working there either. So we do need, I believe, a longer-term reform of the system. And I want to look very carefully at how we would deliver that. I'd be reluctant to make precise commitments around some of that because I think these are very complex and very difficult areas to address. You will all know that. And the relationship between what happens in our schools and with the National Health Service as well is an area of discussion that I've been having with Wes Streeting, our Shadow Health Secretary. We need to better connect those two areas of work. And I think what we also need to see much more of, which is what Labour delivered last time we were in government, was more effective early intervention, more effective early help to address problems as soon as they arise. Because what I hear increasingly when I visit schools is that often problems are picked up much too late. If we can intervene as early as possible, and I think also with wider support services around families, that's what school leaders tell me is often missing. Yes, it's what happens within your own schools, but beyond that, the absence of wider mental health support, all of the pressures around the SEND system are part of what is driving some of those workload pressures and making life just so difficult for many people.
I think conference will find it refreshing actually that you stop short of making any specific commitments rather than trying to find a headline from the platform that you've got. That's quite reassuring and refreshing, I think. But I think if you can give us any further reassurance about the urgency with which you try and address it,
yes,
that might be helpful.
It is absolutely urgent. I mean, these problems have been developing over many years, and I don't use the word crisis lightly, but I genuinely believe that there is a crisis in the system that we see right now. This is a complex area, and it's an area that I would be keen to work with you, to work with other professionals, to work with health services to get right. I think we need a settlement and we need a system that endures for the long run. What the government have set out through that much delayed SEND review, a lot of it won't even have taken effect ahead of the election. So, that presents us with a number of challenges in making sure that we're setting out a very clear plan for government if we were to be elected around how we make change.
Thanks. I want to move to early years, and I can't believe that this question is third on my list, actually, because my early years colleagues normally chase me around to make sure that we remind everybody that that's where it starts, and if we don't get it right in the early years, we don't get it right anywhere. But how would Labour support the early years sector? You mentioned it in your speech, but in particular, what would you do to help maintain nursery schools to survive and thrive?
Well, I share the views of your early years colleagues and the importance of this, and it's an absolute priority for me. I've hopefully been as clear as I possibly can that this is a real priority to address early years and early years education and childcare, for the very reason, as you say, that in failing to get it right, we store up lots of problems for the future. And I just don't think it's right or fair that so many of our children arrive at school having already slipped behind their more affluent peers. The government, in the course of the budget, of course, announced more money to go into the system. I don't think putting money into a system that is just not working, just not delivering, and is broken is the way to do it. And we will set out bigger reform around the whole system altogether. Maintained nurseries are brilliant. I visited so many fantastic, amazing maintained nurseries that really do demonstrate the importance of teacher-led, graduate-led provision, the effective interventions, the outcomes for children. And I want to make sure that maintained nurseries are able to thrive into the future. I also want to make sure that we don't have barriers in the way of new provision being opened by councils, and that's another area where we've identified that Labour would remove that and make sure that we can see more provision that's being led and driven by councils in the form of maintained nurseries.
Thank you. So our fourth question goes into curriculum. And what are your plans for any major curriculum reform if you come into power?
So I don't think you can deal with curriculum just in isolation. I think it has knock-on consequences right across the system, and I think it has knock-on consequences in terms of the assessment system too. I think with the Prime Minister's recent announcement around extending maths to 18, I think that shows what comes of making ill-considered, one-off snap announcements without properly thinking through how you're going to deliver on change. So I'm clear that there are changes that will be needed within the curriculum system overall. But when I speak to all of you, when I visit schools and nurseries around the country, when I see the pressure that everyone is under, I'm not convinced that throwing everything up in the air is really the first priority of a Labour government. I want to see change so that we do have an effective curriculum that really is fit for the future, that makes sure that all of our young people are ready for what comes next. But again, we have to be very, very careful that we get that right. And I think given that so many of the pressures that we see in our schools around recruitment and retention, CAMS, SEND, all of the pressure that you're dealing with, I think we need urgent action to address that as a real priority.
Well, you've got 37,000 plus working school leaders in membership here that I'm sure will be very eager to share their expertise with you on that through our committees. So look, my fifth, and it goes to what you've just said actually about throwing everything into the air. At conference, I know I'm obsessed with this, 8 Secretaries of State in the 5 years that I've been General Secretary. But that means 8 Secretaries of State that have arrived with a need to make their mark pretty quickly. And it's a temptation of any new minister to come in and make a raft of changes. So what reassurance can you give us that if you're Secretary of State for Education, that you wouldn't just bring around more rushed change?
As Keir Starmer has set out, we want to move away from this kind of culture of sticking plaster politics that we've seen and have a much longer term view about the change we need right across our society. At a personal level, if I could have asked for one job in the shadow cabinet, if that was my decision, I would absolutely want to be doing this job. It is, I think, the best job in the shadow cabinet, and it means a great deal to me to want to get this right. And I want to make sure that government rebuilds that trust and that relationship with our brilliant teachers and school leaders. I know that so much of that has broken down. Now, we might not always agree on things, and it would be your job, if I was Secretary of State, to make life really hard for me and to make life hard for the government. That's as it should be. And no government minister should be afraid of challenge, should be afraid to defend their position. But at the same time, I think, as we saw in the schools bill, if you rush ahead, if you don't listen, if you don't engage, if you're not led by what the evidence is pointing you towards, you will very quickly run into trouble. And I want to avoid that kind of approach. I want a constructive approach, a constructive dialogue with people working in our schools, with all of our school staff. That does mean that from time to time we might disagree, but I think moving back to a sense of shared purpose. You want the best for children and young people. That's what I believe as well. And I think if we work together, even where we disagree from time to time, we'll be far more effective.
And that kind of positive friction, for want of a better term, is something that we would be more than happy to get into those debates and make sure that we can build a future with you. But it's that sticking plaster kind of politics that brings me to the question that I just want to indulge myself with for a moment, if conference will forgive me. I really worry about politics right now and the damage that's been done to democracy by the tone of the political discourse and the behaviour, frankly, of some of our political leaders. If you think about Trump and you think about Johnson. I'm just interested that as a senior politician, what are your reflections about politics, and what can politicians do and organisations like the NAHT do to restore confidence in our democratic institutions?
How long have you got?
It's almost an essay question.
It is absolutely. Firstly, that isn't the way I do my politics. That's not the approach that I will take. I mean, I appreciate sometimes that can be frustrating. We're having this discussion. You're asking me quite rightly lots of detailed questions about policy change and what we would do. And in some areas, I want to do further work in setting out what that will be. I'm not going to make every commitment, every promise, because I want to be confident that when I'm making promises, when I'm making commitments, I'm absolutely able to deliver them. I think that is really important. And sometimes that does make it frustrating when I'm pushed on certain aspects of what we might do, particularly where I'm pushed on spending, because we do face an incredibly difficult economic climate at the moment. We all know the pressures that families are under, the cost of living crisis, but it goes beyond that. And I think given the seriousness of the approach that the way in which the government failed to be serious about the economy, the fact they crashed the economy, that's going to leave us with some very, very difficult choices about what we can and can't do and the pace of change. But I will always seek to be constructive in the way that I work with you, work with everyone right across the sector. And that sometimes means that I will be perhaps frustrated that we can't move as fast as we would like. But when I am setting out policy, when I'm making commitments to you, I'll be confident that what I'm saying I will make happen, and I will say nothing more than that.
Bridget, thank you for being with us. I can assure you, whether in opposition or in government, we will give freely of our time, our advice and commitment. And if you do find yourself in the DfE at any point, we'll be there to make sure that we can help you make the right decisions. But conference, can we show our appreciation in the normal way? Thank you very much indeed. Thanks.
Conference, a phrase my NHT colleagues regularly use is that decisions are made by those that show up. Thank you for showing up today, Bridget. Recently, we've shared our concerns with Ofsted about school funding, teacher recruitment, and workload with our elected government. And being frank, it often feels like our lived experience is being minimised and, at worst, ignored. And I'm sure that many delegates today will find it refreshing to hear from a politician who is willing to show up, engage constructively, and articulate a positive vision for our young people in our care and the teachers in our schools. Bridget, thank you again for coming to Conference 2023. Good luck with your campaigning for an ambitious future for our schools and our children. There's no bigger job. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.